he about to say, I am going to do the great leap forward in the United States of America in 2026? Okay, low key. You could say that that's what Donald Trump is trying to do.
You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Piers Morgan recently did a panel that was in large part about Hasan Piker. They talked about some other things, but he essentially had a few people on, including Cenk Uygur, to have this whole discussion about Hasan Piker in Hasan's absence, which made it just look kind of bizarre. However, both Piers and Hasan acknowledged that he's been turning down going on the show and hasn't wanted to go on, so that's the reason that he wasn't there for this one. I'm not sure if he said in that instance that he's going to go on soon. I assume he will. It seems like he'll probably go on there to have a conversation at some point, but it would be an incredibly hostile environment. And, Piers Morgan has essentially taken the bait, obviously, as a right-winger and reactionary, taken the bait on this Hasan Piker narrative and, essentially overinflating that into something that is worth a lot of concern. Various things that he said in the past, does it imply that he has some kind of dark or sinister ideology? So don't worry, we're going to get into that because Dave Smith is the person on the panel who really interrogates that the closest. The rest was a lot of just shouting about whether America deserved 9/11 or whatever. Just dumb distraction stuff. And then even to the extent that they get into the Mao Zedong comments and stuff about China, it's still just kind of a distraction, but at least there's some actual ideology being discussed there. So Cenk does a decent job defending Hasan here, kind of demurs to do so on certain topics like the Mao thing. But again, we'll get to that. So here's a few clips of Cenk talking to all of these lunatics about Hasan Piker.
They see these quotes come back and they think this guy is very extreme. And they believe they have a right to be fearful of people like him becoming the faces of the Democrat Party. Before I go to Vinny to talk about that, what would you say in his defense?
Yeah, look, we are all on the air for literally tens of thousands of hours. So I've debated Hasan a lot of this stuff, and he comes from the more, I don't know what word to ever put on it, radical left, max left, whatever it is, right? But again, I'm in favor of Big Ten, and I come from the populist left. So there are some things that are just, you misspeak, and it happens. And he said about 4 dumb things out of, 10, 20, 30,000 hours on air, which, you want to disagree with those? Good news. He also disagrees with those. In fact, the 9/11 comment, he came on the Young Turks right afterwards and disavowed it. So it's that people are trying to make it seem like he still believes it when he disavowed it instantly. Now, if you want to get into a real substantive debate about, hey, where on the socialism, communism, capitalism spectrum we should be, great. I mean, Haas and I have had that debate for hours and hours. That's at least substantive. We used to do something called agitprop for our members on the Young Turks, where Haas and I would only debate those kind of economic issues.
Okay.
So that's a legitimate debate, but going back and nitpicking each comment, come on, Vinny, you and I have also said things we probably wish we hadn't said.
All right, well, Vinny, your response.
With all due respect, I have so many things to say, Piers, and thank you for having me on. I miss you. I've been gone for a while, but I keep hearing this big tent Democratic Party, and you know what? Its majority is inside these tents are freaking clowns. So Cenk, you're having these Cenks giving whatever. I've said crazy stuff. You know what I've never said, Cenk, in my entire life? America deserved Americans over 3,000 dying, burning to death, and jumping to their freaking death, and there's no excuse for that.
There's something so inherently dishonest about this entire democratic socialist movement, starting with the fact that Bernie Sanders, who first popularized it, is not a democratic socialist and doesn't even know what democratic socialism means. I mean, Cenk, you must have seen when he was on Bill Maher's show, what was it, last year, a little over that, and they asked him about the difference, his position between equality versus equity. He had never heard the terms before. He was completely deer in the head. Like, how does anyone live in this world and not have a thought? It's like if you asked me about the non-aggression principle and I hadn't heard of it. What are you talking? This is your entire life's work. Bernie Sanders claims to be a democratic socialist, runs as essentially a welfarist. We should have a higher minimum wage and universal health care. Well, that's basically just being a liberal Democrat. But then he uses the term where Professor Richard Wolff and Bhaskar Sankara, they'll tell you that they mean revolution, democratizing the entire workplace, outlawing all employers. Well, hey, so now these guys don't run as revolutionaries. They run as, hey, we're just talking about the unaffordability crisis, but they use the term democratic socialist. The point I was getting at, it's not to smear him or to cancel it. I just want people to stake out their positions clearly. And look, I get your point, brother. Like, I think I probably agree with almost everything you said in that rant. It just never addressed like my concern. And like, so listen, obviously, as you know, I'm not the guy who's trying to smear someone for being an anti-war critic. And of course, you know that I know that, of course, a huge percentage of the opposition to your nephew and to Mamdani and all of this is just blatant Israel supporters who want to ruin him over that, and then will find any other thing they can to discredit them. The point is that Hasan has also given him a ton of low-hanging fruit, and I'm asking the question about the mentality here, because, brother, I am with you if you're talking about how our money shouldn't go to funding a genocide or fighting a stupid war on behalf of a foreign country that is bankrupting and destroying our country, and I'm with you on the fact that screw any of them for getting morally outraged about anyone. You sit on the corpses of innocent dead children. You talk to me about any moral outrage about what a streamer said on their stream. That being said, man, whether the factories are owned by individual capitalists or whether they are owned by the central state is the difference between whether people die by the tens of millions or not. And that is true every single time that it's played out. And there is a movement on the left here who is flirting with these ideas as if they are serious. And I'm telling you right now, Cenk, if these people like your nephew were to real deal get control of our Department of Agriculture, I'll be siding with the neocons against you, because that's even worse. That's even worse than the warfare state, is real deal state socialism.
His minimalizing of Mao's outrages and genocidal monstrosity is a very concerning part of his record. We could talk about this for hours, but we're not going to.
You can debate Hasan, but don't make it seem like all Democrats agree with him, because that's the.
Well, can you tell Hasan to come on?
And don't make it. Abdul al-Sayed never said any of those things.
All right.
And you know that
Cenk,
tomorrow on CNN they're going to pretend that Abdul said it.
Cenk, I would love to have Hasan on for some baffling reason.
I know regular people who think
hang on, Dave. I would like to take up Hasan's uncle's offer to have Hasan on. I'm available anytime he'd like to come on uncensored, because at the moment he keeps saying no. So if you could put a good word in, Cenk, I'd appreciate it.
And by the way, you guys have never talked about, you've never talked about why he's popular in the first place. He's popular because he's anti-war. He's popular because he wants to stick up for the average American. And he might have a different way of doing it than you guys do. But he's not establishment. He's not corrupt. He's for money out of politics. He's for all the things that are super popular well. And yes, Dave,
Cenk,
we have disagreements over Medicare for all and higher minimum wage poll at 65% or higher. Those are super popular positions.
And he hates America, Cenk. He hates America.
Cenk is basically just taking the tack of like, it's okay for Hasan to have diverging beliefs on these things, or essentially saying that whatever his opinion on Mao is, or 9/11, whether he should have said that, it's a big tent and, we can allow these ideas in, or it's not the worst thing in the world. So I think that's good, but it opens the door for them to then say, okay, but you are expanding this big tent to these sinister ideas, and Dave Smith goes into his theory that the democratic socialists are not being honest about what they want, and that there is an inherent insidious ideology, murderous ideology that is underneath the likes of Mamdani. And so Hasan responds to that as well, and I'll show you that in a second, because I think he does a decent job. But this is the conversation that's sort of evolving out of the increasing relevance of DSA, because there's the question of like, how much socialism do people want? Are we talking about full socialization of the economy, ownership of the means of production, revolution, etc.? So that's what Dave Smith is pointing to and saying these people have differing beliefs on these things. And that is actually true, they do. And the point of democratic socialism is that it is democratic, amongst a body. Certainly democratic socialism in America as it is currently is a democratic process amongst people who are members and who caucus together. So some of those people are more radical to the left than others, more pro-state versus not pro-state. But ultimately, the point is to democratize parts of the economy. And so that's where Dave Smith and a lot of people in their hysterics are missing the point and the appeal of the current DSA strain. And I think what's going to end up coming out of it and being the sort of permanent effect of it is that people will be less afraid of this idea of socialism based on, fear mongering about Mao Zedong or whatever, because they will, I hope, come to recognize that what the democratic socialists want is ultimately to move the economy in a direction that benefits the average person more, regardless of what some of the vastness of these differences in ideologies might actually be. So that's incumbent on the DSA to deliver and to be pragmatic in their approach to these things. And you could argue that, throwing out some of the more radical agenda items kind of works against that. But you could also argue that any of this conversation is a good thing, essentially. And what Hasan Piker is seeking to do and succeeding in doing, as well as what the DSA and a lot of their candidates are doing in general, is moving the conversation to the left a little bit in terms of what it's appropriate for us to talk about and consider. So you're going to have the extremists. Like Dave Smith is an extremist when it comes to libertarianism, and he's able to make pretty reasoned critiques of the military-industrial complex, but ultimately he's coming from a perspective of he would argue against any state ownership or procurement of any service, and would argue that those existing state entitlements or whatever you would call them are the reason for all of our woes, and that they essentially indebt us, and that free market capitalism is the true answer to everything. So the democratic socialists exist because people like Dave Smith and people who have much more noxious ideas and radical ideas culturally and economically on the right have been allowed to thrive within the Republican Party and just as a general right-wing movement for the last several years, certainly since Trump came around, but before that as well. And the fact that Dave Smith is so concerned, he's just concerned about this little kernel of uncertainty that he sees in these people that he feels they have secret beliefs, secret intentions other than what they're really making the conversation about. When this is a guy who voted for Donald Trump, has spoken with Nick Fuentes, and doesn't view any of those wings of the right as suspect or bizarre or nefarious in any type of way. So before I wrap that up, here's a clip of Hasan talking about some of this, responding to mostly what Dave Smith said here, because like I said, that's kind of the more substantive argument. So here's him responding to that.
You know that I love and respect you, Cenk. So you got to understand, dude, that's freaking concerning for people. The fact...
Brother, it's concerning. It is concerning.
That these types, whatever you want to call it, the left maximalist types, if they were to look at the industrial...
We're gonna... No. Is he about to say, I am going to do the great leap forward in the United States of America in 2026? Okay, low key. You could say that that's what Donald Trump is trying to do. What do you think? What do you think rebuilding the American industrial base looks like, King?
Revolution in England or in the United States of America. They have nothing to say except for exploitation, capitalist wage theft.
Wait, that's not true. I have the exact same position on the American Revolution, which was a progressive revolution nonetheless. It was a revolution comprised and led by bourgeois landowners, but it was good. But there were also some excesses in the aftermath and before, indigenous genocide and also the continuation of chattel slavery. Like that's, you got to take the good and the bad. It's a bourgeois national revolution.
But when it comes to Mao Zedong, who's slaughtering people by the tens of millions, pointing guns at people's heads and...
Wait, does he think leftists think the Industrial Revolution was bad? He said, these guys are all anarcho-primitivists. They hate the Industrial Revolution. Famously, that's what the Marxist literature says. That's what the Marxists say all the time. For a guy who just shat on Bernard Sanders for apparently not knowing a thing about socialism. Brother, I don't think you know anything about Marxism. What the who amongst the left says the Industrial Revolution was bad?
He's the worst person who ever lived. Mao Zedong is the worst
this is somebody
mass
that your
murderer
nephew
who
is
ever
cosplaying
lived.
on a daily basis. He murdered my family and countless other people, tens of millions. In fact, he has more blood on his hands than Hitler and Stalin. This is the guy that you're...
Mao Zedong is worse than Hitler and Stalin. He's the worst person who ever lived. Now, I know under different circumstances, this would be probably considered, I mean, this used to be considered Holocaust revisionism, the double Holocaust theory, famously cultivated by the Daughters of the Confederacy version in Nazi Germany. After World War II, that was like immediately what they tried to do. To be like, don't you think that Stalin and Mao are far worse than... Don't you think that Stalin and Mao are far worse than Hitler, actually? Like, it is a way to minimize the Holocaust.
So he's kind of doing the thing that I've seen a lot of streamers do here, which I find a little annoying when he's like responding to a video, which is to like pause it every few seconds and respond to like little bits of what they're saying at a time instead of just like listening to what they say and then responding to it. Although I will say it serves the purpose of kind of interrupting the worked up urgency of what Dave Smith is saying here. But still, I think he could have given a more holistic response to this, like responded overall to what Dave Smith was saying. But I think he does end up offering a pretty good argument. And he's also saying, like, I'm not a Mao supporter. I'm not a Maoist. I don't think we should do Maoism in America. And he says that all the time, but it never matters because it's just about these little things. And it's just people freaking out and panicking over the idea that someone would be discussing Mao or would be discussing China as an economic model to look towards. And the idea that they want to frame Mao as like the worst mass murderer of all time above Hitler. Hasan is correct that that's essentially historical revisionism. To say that he is a genocidal murderer to the extent or worse than the extent of Hitler is just ahistorical. And the death toll that comes with some of these mistakes in structuring or planning the economy is nothing to be ignored, but it's also not the same as purposely genociding a certain portion of the people, even if some of those portions of people who were killed under Mao Zedong or someone else were purposely rounded up and killed. That's the part where any historian would tell you it's not genocidal to the extent of what Hitler did. So like the lack of a basic framing that all of these people dying in these communist countries is not a good thing and is a sure sign of failure of those projects. Although China did go on to be a successful economic project in many ways that are not market capitalism, it used to be basic common sense to say Hitler was a different type of beast than that. Hitler was a genocidal maniac on a scale of evil, worse than anybody else that had ever existed. It's correct that used to be common knowledge. Nothing has changed other than the fact that the right wing has taken over mainstream politics in such a way that now this type of anti-communism before all else as the highest principle and the highest urgent need has now found its way into the mainstream conversation. We'll see how much that sticks in terms of how much do people really believe that. It's been very pervasive in America over the last 100 years. But people like Dave Smith, who are ideologically right-wing, are the ones who are most panicked about these, what they view as these little kernels of ideas of socialism or whatever that is going to unfold into mass murder. And there's a reason that he has to tie basic things like healthcare or education and these things being free in the same way that the library or the fire department is free. Yes, somebody pays for it, but it's something that we all pay into systematically, and therefore it is free for all. And they have to tie that to some form of mass murder because ideologically they believe that concessions to the working class are akin to that type of destruction, to being worse than Hitler. So, I mean, that's the type of right-wing ideology and entrenchment that we're up against in America, and there's gonna be a lot of screaming and crying about it, but the fact that the Democratic Socialists are getting a hold is a good thing, and it's just time to stay locked in now more than ever.
I'm in the pocket, and they know they can't slow it, can't stop shit. How the game so cold, so toxic, can't drop cause they're in somebody's pocket. For me that's not it,